Hello, and welcome to the Engineer Your Success, Leadership, and Life Harmony Like a Mother show. I am your host, Kenya Romanovska, award-winning investigative journalist turned maternity leave and working motherhood strategist. And we have this show for you because we know that becoming a new mom or a new working mom can be hard and lonely. Your career can change, your relationships change, your finances change, your identity changes. So that's why we host these conversations with expert guest speakers and myself to help you feel not so alone on this journey and to turn from overwhelmed to feeling like you can truly thrive and know what you want as a working mom. And my guest today is Kate McKenzie. We are going to be covering such interesting topics. She is a mom of a 1.5-year-old girl, and she's pregnant and due with a baby in this summer. And she has a big vision for the world. We're going to talk with her about how to use a storytelling approach to build your personal brand, tools to maintain resiliency in the face of difficulty, and then her work on the secret marathon and gender equality. And let me tell you about her and her biography. She is the director and founder of Worldviews Productions, a digital media production company that specializes in sharing stories of innovation and solutions across sectors through film, events, and community engagement projects. And her production company recently completed a feature-length film called The Secret Marathon, and it was directed and produced by Kate. And it shares the story of the first women to run a marathon in Afghanistan. And she's also the co-founder and current director of story and culture for The Secret 3K, which is an international run-walk hosted in 24 countries, and that supports every person's rights to run freely in their community. She is a business strategist, and she has worked with over 400 businesses, coaching them to achieve growth, both in Alberta with ATBX and in Toronto with the Transmedia Zone Accelerator programs. And she has her master's in digital media from Ryerson University, as well as a bachelor's in education with a specialization in experiential learning. And she's passionate about sharing stories across a variety of mediums and is a published author, professional speaker, and exhibiting fine artist. Wow, Kate, welcome.
Hello, great to be here. I'm so excited to be joining you today from Mokhintis, which is the traditional Blackfoot name for Calgary. And, we've got some sunny skies out here, so it's a good day to be chatting with you, Kenya.
It's such a pleasure to be talking with you too. And I can't wait to cover all of these topics. Behind the scenes, we talked about raccoons and squirrels and gardening and the kind of almost like a Peter Rabbit moment in your life where you're fighting for the survival of your flowers to the Afghanistan marathon, right? And women. So lots of different topics to cover, and personal branding is going to be a fun chat. Let me tell you who's winning. Is it you or the squirrel right now when it comes to your garden and your
I don't know. I think the squirrel might be winning, Kenya. I've been trying to chase after it and replant my flowers, but it keeps digging them up. But you know what? I am a fighter, so I feel like I'm going to take on this squirrel.
So it's 1 squirrel, 0 Kate for now, or what's the score?
Oh man, I think the score is maybe 5 for the squirrel, 1 for me.
Yeah, so it's going to be an interesting summer adventure in gardening and adulting, right? It's a passion of many women in our community. Actually, they love the earth, they love nature, and so you are not alone in your endeavors of trying to grow something edible or beautiful.
I try. I know we're chatting too today a little bit about resiliency. And I think for me, getting out into my garden, even just a little bit of time during my lunch break, right? Sometimes it helps you get that reframe, or, the number of ideas that I've had while I'm just weeding, or if it's been a bad day at work, then you can pretend those weeds are whatever you need to as you pull them out.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful metaphor. So then tell us about, the topics that we're going to be covering today. Why are they near and dear to your heart? And if you want to bring in more gardening metaphors and pepper them through, it's also part of creating memorable conversations too, right? When we can weave in stories like that. So why is personal branding, why is resiliency, and why are the secret marathon important topics?
Well, you know what? To keep going with that gardening metaphor, I think, I love when I'm walking a lawn, and especially when I'm in sort of a downtown urban area, and you see this little plant. Sometimes it's like a flower that has somehow edged its way up through the concrete and it's
Mm.
growing there against all odds, right? And I love the ones that are like bright, colorful colors, right? And it's just this one single solitary plant, right? I think why I've always loved that is because it's something that stands out in the stark contrast of all the concrete jungle that's around it, right? Something that had the courage and the bravery to be beautiful in the midst of all of that. And I think I've been drawn to those stories my whole life for a lot of reasons. One, because I love a classic underdog story. And I think the other reason is that for myself, I've dealt with mental health issues for most of my life. And so I need these kinds of stories to keep me hopeful, to keep me optimistic. I wouldn't say that I'm naturally this glass half full kind of gal. And so I think when I see those kinds of stories, when I see those kinds of symbols like a plant emerging out of the concrete, it gives me that important reminder to say, yeah, this is doable. Whatever I'm facing right now, I can, keep rising above it. And I find when I can find others that are doing that kind of work, hear their story, it really fits for me around being able to not only promote my own resiliency, but then to inspire others, right? And that's what I love doing, is sharing those kinds of stories of resiliency, sharing those stories of innovation, because I think it has a ripple effect, right? And so I think when we talk about our personal brands, right, I think lots of times people feel like, oh, that's like shining a light on me, and I feel
Mhm.
uncomfortable about that. But I think it's more about saying, well, how could you use your voice, your brand, who you are, to shine a light on the things that you love the most and the things you want to highlight in your community and in your world. And for me, it's shining that light on people that are doing innovative and inspiring things, right? And I really believe that that's how we move forward as humans, right? And so I think everything I've done kind of has that through line in it.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that. We can explore examples more in depth. Before we continue, let's define the personal brand. It's a concept that's grown in popularity. We talk about it more and more. So we've had a few perspectives, and we actually recently did an exercise in our community about making a list. One consultant called it a brag bag. Another one said, make a list of 25 reasons why you're hot shit. That's the term she used. And it kind of made me laugh. And so we did that in our community last week. And when I heard the stories of the women I get to work with in STEM, it was jaw dropping. There's a lot of humility in those circles. And then when actually people do take the time to acknowledge the magic they bring in the world, they value bring in the world, it's wow, right? It's memorable. And especially if you share those things in a way that's memorable, and
Yes.
attach kind of like an emotional connection, a story, which you're going to talk about
Mhm.
storytelling, it can help us shine our light brighter. At first, I think people
Yes.
people think, yes, a personal brand is about like me, bragging, but it's not that, is it?
No, I think it's about a couple things. I think it's about being consistent. So I love and I totally recommend checking out, if you don't know about Terry O'Reilly and his podcast Under the Influence, check that out, especially all of y'all that are into marketing. This is one of my favorite podcasts. And he uses this analogy that whenever we're talking about our businesses or about marketing or things like that, it should feel like broccoli. And I always love this idea. So if you think about a little piece of broccoli, right? It's got a stem and then it's got a part that like is fluffy on top. So it looks like a little tree, right? And when I get a big bunch of broccoli, it looks like a stem and that fluffy bit, it's a tree. If I break down a little piece of it, it still looks like a tree. I break it down, break it down, break it down. It always looks like a tree. There's that level of consistency in broccoli, right? And so I think part of us thinking about our personal brand is, how do you show up consistently in all of the places where you are, right? And so that might be, how do you show up consistently on your LinkedIn? And does that match what you have on your email footer, right? Your signature that you use? Does that match what you have on your voicemail? Are you thinking about how does that show up for you when you go and do networking at events? A lot of us are starting to re-emerge from our little, COVID cocoons. And so I think it's asking ourselves, where does that show up? So I'll give an example. For me, one of the things I'm really passionate about is looking for opportunities for reconciliation in our communities. And how do we do that in better ways with our Indigenous communities. And so I started off today talking to you about where I'm from, Mojintis, the traditional Blackfoot name for Calgary, right? But I realized recently that I didn't have that in my email signature. I hadn't included that piece. So for me to show up consistently and be true to my values, that means, hey, I should add that piece in, that I'm proud to work in Treaty 7, that that's something that is important to me to state, right? And so I think it's kind of thinking about how do our values show up in all of those places, right? And I think some of the low-hanging fruit that I often see that folks are missing is just even thinking about, hey, what does my LinkedIn look like lately? You know, that is one of the first places people are going to find you online, one of the first ways that they're going to encounter your personal brand. So does your LinkedIn look like a house where someone lives and the lights are on? Or
Yeah.
does your LinkedIn look like it's a derelict house that no one has visited in years, and the shutters are fallen off? What does it look like, right? And so I'm not saying that you have to go in there. I know, like, we're working moms. Trust me, I am prioritizing spending time with my family and working on my career. I know some of you are like, I do not have time to do one more social media channel. But here's the thing, it's about thinking about what can you sustain and how can you make it at least look like that profile has been lived in recently. So updating your current workplace, making sure that that you post every once in a while something that might be helpful to your community, and something that where you're bringing value to others and being of service to others through your area of expertise.
Yes, absolutely. And it takes experimenting. It's not like you do it once and then you figured out the sustainable way to do it. What did it look like for you to do that and to find your secret sauce online? I certainly know I'm experimenting about where I want to show up, how I want to show up, and also values shifting and priorities shifting. That would be a second follow-up question. But let's start with the beginning. How did you find your space and time and consistency?
I think a big part of it for me is starting with what are your values? What's your purpose, that you want to set for yourself? And so, I coach a lot of businesses, as you had mentioned. I've worked with over 400 businesses, and a lot of those businesses, I've worked with them to help them identify what are the values they want for their business. But you know what? We can do that for ourselves as well, right? And so I thought about that and realized, as I was having my first child, I was like, well, what are going to be our family values, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm a business, I encourage people to think about, like, what are 5 values that you can list off on one hand, right? That way you can remember them. Because when it
Yes.
gets more than 5, it starts to become a little complicated. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, what are my family values? What are the things I'm going to want to pass on to my little girl, and now to my soon to be son? What do I want them to be hearing about consistently from me? And I think, that's often a good place to start, is asking yourself that question. What are my values? What are our family values? How does that translate into how I want to show up online, right? And so for me, it meant that I want to show up online being consistent with what I believe my purpose is, which is to empower and inspire people, right? So if I'm empowering people, that means I want to share tools, resources, things that I think would be helpful in my community. If I'm inspiring people, that means I'm sharing positive, innovative news, new ideas that people could pursue. It means that I choose not to offer critique or to say negative things online, because that's not consistent with how I want to be. I believe and I value, and what I would teach, to those that are my employees, but also to my children, is that we critique in private and we praise in public. And so that value needs to show up for me in my personal brand then. And that's part of how I'm experimenting with it. And sometimes there's things that you just have to say something about. Like, I think about, this week, my thoughts are absolutely with, the families that are in Texas right now, and, terrible tragedies that have happened there. And there's times when we know that we want to say something, and that can be a huge challenge, right? Because there's times when you're just mad and you're angry about what's happening in the world. And certainly with the work I've done also with the Secret Marathon, I'm mad that the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan. That is not, that's something I'm upset about. And so I can't say anything positive about that, right? But what I can do is I can reframe it through questions, and I can ask for policy changes, because that's consistent with me wanting to empower people and inspire people towards action, right? And so I can ask for us, who can we reach out to? How can communities get involved? How can they make a difference? What are charities that I can research that would be beneficial in these areas? And so I think that's where I try to focus it, even when there's pieces that it doesn't really feel like you could say anything good about it.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for sharing those very, very concrete and specific examples. I love the values conversation. It's foundational to me too. And yesterday I had 3 days. My kids have been in Drumheller with a grandma. So I had 3 days of where I pretty much didn't schedule meetings, and I was able to just be creative, and I created a whole book, almost like a playbook. I guess I could say it's like a personal brand playbook. I've had one for my business, for the colors, for the logo, for, you know, the tagline, for the proportions, even some outlines of how we want to interact with the public, although that takes time to develop as well. But the playbook has my 25-year vision. It has like 5 seasons of life, when there's going to be, you know, the fertile years, the golden years, and when they're going to be teens, and what matters in terms of values and how we want to feel, and our priorities and non-negotiables and our finances. It took me years to actually develop this playbook when I think about it, but it's all there, right? It's kind of it's that personal brand, and these things can evolve. They can evolve. They're not set in stone. For me, 2 big turning points in my life that are affecting my personal brand, I would say, was number 1, becoming a mother and becoming an entrepreneur. And then also the loss of my father. I think it really, and I haven't fully processed how that has impacted my values and vision of success. We live in a very performance-driven culture, and I work with a lot of women who are in very performance-driven environments. So it does take time to reclaim the power of the feminine, the power of motherhood, the power of pause, the power of chaos, rest, all of these things that are not necessarily as valued economically in our society. And it's fascinating to watch, number 1, in the STEM fields. Many women take some time to develop a personal brand. Like they will have fantastic credentials and accomplishments, yet that is not reflected on their LinkedIn profile. So I've seen the transition from people being quiet and having, well, I don't want to say derelict house, but that's what it looks like, from, you know, you don't, to updating, you know, thinking about their values, thinking about their impact and their purpose, and then starting to show up consistently and speaking up and being real and sharing stories and being professional and vulnerable, right? And that way, like bringing those 2 pieces to the table starts creating impact. And then they start seeing conversation happening and people reacting and seeing them as leaders. So, you know, it's a journey, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And I would encourage people to embrace imperfect action, but also to give themselves time to plant those seeds before they go out into the world and kind of, you know, start speaking through a megaphone like, hey, this is me, these are my beliefs, right?
Well, absolutely. And I love that you give that, you know, it doesn't have to all happen at once. And I think, you know, LinkedIn is like a low hanging fruit that a lot of us can tackle. You can even adjust your settings so that you make updates so that no one sees you're making the updates. So you can try out a couple things, see how you feel about it before making it, you know, really truly public, right? And so I think that's something to kind of know about, and that you can try that out. And I think I would also say, in terms of where social media is at, there's often a lot less of that, you know, trolling kind of culture and that kind of thing on LinkedIn. So it's a bit of a safer space to start. But I think, you know, where I see that next stage then for folks is, maybe you're like, yeah, I'm good, Kate. My LinkedIn is updated. I finally put myself out there, feeling strong about that. And I think the next stage is, you know, thinking about, well, how does that personal brand show up for you in person? And whether that is, you know, you going to a family event that you're attending, right, with some other families, other family members, right? Whether it's you showing up at a networking event for your workplace, or, you know, if you're looking for a job, you know, and you're actively doing some of those informational interviews or things like that, you know, the number 1 question you're going to have to answer is, what do you do?
Yep.
So how do you want to show up when you answer that question? And I think taking some time to prepare for that and thinking about, what's my answer going to be, right? And so I love kind of thinking about it as, you know, some of the sentence starters I might suggest for folks if you haven't gone through this is spend some time thinking, okay, I help blank to do blank, right? Or I connect this particular group with this particular group, or I transform a particular problem or challenge or whichever into this, right? But putting it into one sentence, what is it you do? Remove all the jargon, remove all the extra fluff, right? And make sure that it kind of passes the grandma test. Like, would my grandmother, would your grandmother, would they understand what you're saying you do? Does it make sense to anyone, regardless of whether they're in your industry or not? Because I think part of us using our personal brand for good is also making sure that it's repeatable and that people can say, hey, yeah, I know Kate. She's that gal that's really passionate about inspiring, empowering other people. Or I know Kate, yes, what does she do? She helps tell stories of people that are doing innovative and, exciting things in our communities to help provide positive news, right? That's something someone can repeat. I'm not asking them to use all the lingo that I could use if I was making an academic paper about how I do things and the specific approach I use, right? And there's a time and a place for that, absolutely. But it's not in our first line of our intro, right? So I think it's kind of thinking through that and taking some time for yourself to ask yourself, how do I want to answer that question?
Yes, it is a powerful question. It is. It really is a powerful question. And it's important to experiment and then have focus as well over time, right? Because as moms, we risk spreading ourselves thin. That's a real danger.
It's so true. And I think the more that we can say, this is what I do, then we're also putting out there what we want to get more back of, right? And so if I can be really articulate about this is what I love doing, right? And so for me, one of the things I've learned and one of the things that became crystal clear for me after I had my little girl was that I really wanted to be working for purpose-driven organizations. I didn't want to spend time going to a 9 to 5, where I wasn't doing something that was making the world better. And so I got some advice from a woman who said, she said for her, she found it was really helpful to think about what were the 3 sandboxes she wanted to play in, right? And so she encouraged me to think about that for myself. I thought, you know what? Yeah, I love education. I always love opportunities where we can empower people. I love supporting people in entrepreneurial ways. So how do we bring that entrepreneurial lens to what we're doing, right? And then I think there's also this creative space. So where do we get to create and design and play in that kind of area, right? And I'd say for me, I added a 4th, which was around wellness. And so wellness, resiliency is very important to me. So then that allowed me to kind of look at if things don't line up in one of those 4 areas for me, then it's a lot easier for me to say no and say that's not going to be something I'm going to choose to pursue, or that's not going to be something that I choose to promote as part of my personal brand. And so I think this kind of goes into our resiliency piece too. Like if we're going to be building sustainable lives as mothers, right? Then you're right. There's things we have to say no to, but it's also knowing how do we choose the things we also want to say yes to.
That is my biggest topic of passion, I would say, really. And again, in the playbook, I'm not going to share my screen because it's probably going to be a bit overwhelming, but I've been fascinated by this idea of time as a currency, energy as a currency, the concept of profit producing activities that came up in some of my masterminds. Like, what are they in the different sandboxes of your life? And in the Mambi community, we have about 12 of these pillars, and then we identify 4 that will have a domino effect. And so for many people, it's mindset, it'll be health, or it'll be their relationship with their partner, if that is their case, because if those areas are too low fuel or they're not paid attention to, then everything starts crumbling. Energy and health are really big, especially 2 years after the pandemic. And I've been, we all get 168 hours in a week. We sleep for about 1/3 of that. We work for about like a little bit more than a quarter. And it's been a huge revelation for me when I was doing the math and realizing, we spend more time sleeping than in the office. But because well, unless you're working huge overtime hours, right? But everything is built around work and productivity and performance, and we schedule around that, but we still have quite a bit of time left before and after. So it's been a process of years of I've been analyzing, how am I spending my time? How do I want to spend it? What makes me feel good? Does reaching my goals really make me feel good? Am I happier? Are there other things? And I literally have in my playbook I've highlighted how many hours I want to work next year. What are the different patterns? When do I want to work? When I'm not working, when I'm doing a project outside. And
Yes.
I really want to try as hard as possible to stick to those lines in the sand, and to start off the day with the pieces that are non-negotiable. So quality time with my family
Absolutely.
and movement, right? And how can I've discovered some fun things. Like I can, if I walk my kids to and back from school every day, I'm going to get the outside movement. It's going to force me to get
Love
outside.
that.
I can do a workout while I'm cleaning. I used to outsource that in my home, but I lost that resource, and I don't think I'm going to replace it. So I'm thinking creatively about my time. How can I align things that are non-negotiables with, with other things that I absolutely need to do? And
Yes.
how does this use of my finite resource time align with what I'm trying to achieve, how I want to feel with my children and my career? And so I set limits, and my whiteboard has like hyper focus, hyper target. Next year is going to be a year of saying no. And I'll be super honest with you, Kate, and maybe you can give me some advice here. I'm a little bit scared. I talk about saying no all the time, and some of my clients are really good at it, but I haven't practiced my no muscle too much in my business, right? Like I'm not working and I'm meeting people, and some people reach out and they say, do you want to meet for coffee? Do you want to talk? And I know that if I want to reach some of my goals, I'm going to have to start saying no, even if it seems appealing. And I'm nervous about that. I'm nervous that they could
It's
be really
hard.
nice chats and it could be fun, but if they don't line up with my priorities next year. So how do we say no?
Man, it's so hard, and I struggle with that too, especially when something looks shiny and exciting, and
Mhm.
and I think there's that part of our ego too that's like just feels honored that someone would ask us, right? And
Yeah.
we just want to say yes to it. But I think one of the things that I've realized is, and I think this lines up with some of the career choices I've made too, is that when I first started my production company, I was taking on every client I could get because that was what I needed to do to keep paying the bills, right? And
Yeah.
but I realized, as you were saying, that that was sucking the energy out of me, right? And so where I was doing things that, for example, like corporate talking head videos that, it's just like there was nothing exciting about that. I couldn't get passionate about it. And I felt like I was just banging my head against a brick wall every day trying to move forward with that. And my dad gave me some great advice at the time, and I totally ignored it. he said, he's like, "Well, have you ever thought about, like, you don't seem to like editing these videos. Like, this seems to be something that's like causing you a lot of almost like pain. Like, you don't like just being there in front of your computer all day." I'm like, "No, I don't. It's awful. I thought I was gonna like it, but I want to like it, but I don't. It's not for me." And he's like, "Well, what if you outsource that? What if what if you take yourself out of the equation? Like maybe it would be better for you to do something, anything other than editing. Like go and work as a barista and then use that to pay someone else to edit because you might be happier doing it that way." And at the time I was like, "No, like I can't do that. If for me to be taken seriously, I have to be able to edit these films, and I think there was a sense of that imposter syndrome that if I let that piece go, that somehow I wasn't going to be a real filmmaker, right? And I think I had to like kind of go through that terrible, awful growing pains to realize like that wasn't actually true. That was a standard I was holding myself to, and I needed to say no to that identity because it wasn't where I was getting the best energy. So I think sometimes it's about that piece, but sometimes I think it's about reframing the no. So I've also had points where people approach me and they say, "Hey, Kate, I'd love to do a documentary with you. Here's my idea." And I see the idea. I'm like, I'm just not passionate about that topic. And you know what? I know that having done the Secret Marathon film, it was 6 years of my life to get that
Mhm.
thing across the finish line. And you know
Oh
what?
yeah.
It was something I needed to be passionate about. And I was passionate about gender equality. I was passionate about the right women have to be able to move their bodies, go for a run anywhere in the world. And I was passionate about sharing a different kind of story from Afghanistan, one that wasn't just about war and terror, right? And that passion fueled me to keep going when it got difficult, when it got even more difficult, when
Yeah.
we lost main characters, when pandemic hit and we couldn't bring our film to theaters. Like I had to have that passion to keep me going. And I know that's not always the case for other topics. And so reframing that no for me means saying, well, who do I know in my community that might be passionate about that, for whom this would be a great opportunity, where this might be something that is a breakthrough moment for them. So I think the other thing I think we need to do as women more is develop a little bit of a roster of who are some other women that we can make referrals to, right? And
Yes.
so when we're saying no, we might be saying no for ourselves, but we're saying yes for someone else, right? And so I think it's also building up people in our community. And so I think as a filmmaker, that's incredibly important for us to give opportunities to new and emerging filmmakers, especially, I believe that especially for other female filmmakers and for filmmakers of color, because we don't see them as represented as they should be in our industry. And so I think whatever your industry is thinking about, who are the folks that you would turn to if there's a project or if there's an opportunity that you can't take? And sometimes it's just because the timing doesn't work or whatever, right? But who do you want to have on your roster that you are referring? Because then I think the no doesn't feel quite so awful, because you're creating an amazing opportunity for someone else.
I love that. That's a great answer. I'll tuck that into my back pocket. It does, sometimes I may have somebody to refer, and sometimes I may not have anybody to refer them to. And I guess that's okay too. I think there's something to be said for us not carrying all the weight of the world either. I work with women who are extremely passionate about making a big impact, and they push themselves sometimes so hard, often to the detriment of their own health and energy,
Yes.
right? And so that's something we're exploring collectively together, to give ourselves permission to say no and not feel guilty about it.
Mm-hmm.
And just accept that we don't have to solve every single problem that comes our
Yeah.
way, right? So, but I love that. I love that solution. It's really a good one. I'm going to keep it in mind if I have somebody who reaches out and who asks for something that I can't support in that moment.
Oh, absolutely. I think the other side too is that I think we sometimes need to say no to some of the things we're doing in our own homes. And so I think for me, I've had to realize and learn, how do I make sure that myself and my partner, that we're co-parenting, that it's not just one of us or the other of us. And before I got into filmmaking and into my current role, doing business coaching and some of this area, I was actually a teacher for years. And so I taught junior high. And let me tell you, little quick life hack here. The majority of children, when they enter into the school system, they get signed up by their moms. And so who's the first contact name that's at the top of that list of the school? It's mom. Or when you're at day home, the first contact name is mom, right? And so when that kid is sick, who gets called first? When that kid has any problems at school, who gets called first? It's not necessarily because the school has a bias towards only phoning the mothers. It's because that's who the first contact name is listed. So even simple things like changing whose name appears first,
Yes.
right, is thinking about, have I alternated with my partner as to whose name is going to appear first in some of those scenarios, right? Because I don't have to book all the dentist appointments. I don't have to be the one that responds to all of the things. And I was really inspired by Melinda Gates talks about in her book, Moment of Lift, about when she started asking Bill Gates to go pick up their kids from school or do drop-offs to school, because she said, I can't do it all. I need this to be a 50-50, right? And she started getting comments from other mothers that were in their community saying, it's so amazing to see that Bill is dropping off the kids at school. And, I told my husband, hey, if Bill Gates can drop off kids at school, you can too. So I think there's opportunities here where, we can reestablish, how might we share some of that load with our partners? I mean, and I'm going to recognize too, I'm in a privileged place. I have a great partner who supports me absolutely. And I would not be where I am without his support and without his encouragement. I know there's a lot of folks who don't have that support in their relationship, or perhaps have chosen to do solo parenting. And so I hear you, and that is a challenge, but we also have opportunities to build a network around us of support. So whether that's parents or friends or neighbors or whomever, are there ways we can say no to some of the things we're doing, or some of the expectations we put on ourselves to make our houses look, spick and span all the time, or to do all of the things, or whichever, right? Are there ways that we can say no to some of those parts that aren't actually bringing energy and life forward for us, so we can say yes to the things that we are really passionate about?
Absolutely. And just like you, I want to recognize the enormous privilege as well to even be having those conversations. we've been doing an updated gratitude challenge in the community. And when I see what we're writing, what we're really grateful for, it's like, it's the small pleasures of life. And I am in that process. I'd love to share the experience of how we've done it with my partner. My husband's a teacher, and he's the contact. We just had our open house for kindergarten yesterday at the elementary school. We went together,
Oh,
but
awesome.
here's the contact information. He signed up on the school portal. He's the main contact. Same thing with our day home. One of our doctor's offices keeps on calling me, but I'm like, please call my husband because I'm not available during those times, right? And okay, here's the thing. My husband has been the lead caregiver in our household, and I hate to break it, but it doesn't solve all the problems. I think that there's this book that came out, it's called Pay Up. And we have this thought where if only our partners are going to play an equal role, then everything is going to get better. And it's not that simple. He went through a phase of doing the dual shift, and it's been hard on him. And I realized, well, is that what we really want for our family? Like, yay, Kenya's business, yay, Kenya helping mothers. But now my partner is the one who's doing that double shift, and he's done it humbly, without complaining, with full devotion to me and our kids. But I don't think that doing that on a mass level is going to solve the issues we have in families balancing dual careers. I think it takes a second layer of reflection. And so I'll share my next chapter. Is I've had a season of scaling up, and I shared that with you behind the scenes. And now I have a season of kind of scaling down, because I want to go to some very, very raw simplicity, learn, revisit the lessons, be present. I'm going to take over the role of the lead caregiver. I'm going to limit my number of working hours. And I'm at peace with that, because I truly know what matters to me in this season of life. It doesn't mean I cannot have an interesting creative career. It doesn't mean I cannot push to grow in a different season. But we reflected with my partner on this year. How has it looked like in this almost picture perfect feminist household, where my husband does the lunches, dresses the kids, helps with the laundry, does the grocery, does the pickups, does the drop-offs, right? And it's not like I don't do anything. I do other things, but it doesn't solve the issue of parents feeling burnout. It doesn't. And so we're going to test that we're going to test something different in that season. And I'm saying, it's just because your partner is going to do some of these things, it doesn't mean you're going to be less stressed. You have to really start saying no to things and prioritize and simplify things in this season. That's what I'm going to test out. And well, I'll share with this community what happens when I do that. But it's a complex. It's a complex, like, it's a really complex issue. And again, I'm going to recognize the privilege of saying that some people really do not have what we do already, that we're talking about this. I'm able to split things with my partners. For a person solo parenting out there who's facing like crises or challenges that, they might be, wow, this looks like a dream. So I want to recognize, again, the enormous privilege.
Absolutely.
Thoughts welcome, Kate. I kind of opened a big story,
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. I think, a book I read recently that I'll recommend to folks, if you haven't checked it out yet, is called Drop the Ball by Tiffany Dufu. Amazing book. She really does talk about, how can we realign some of these things with our partners. But yeah, absolutely. There's policy changes, like how we support, more options for childcare that are really key to this. But it's also how do we also advocate for changes in our workplaces, right? And so, it's been interesting. I've been talking to a bunch of different workplaces right now, and because I'm thinking about what's my next dream job going to be after my maternity leave? What would I love to do? And, it was interesting in talking with one organization. They said, Kate, our senior leaders here, don't expect that it's 9 to 5. We often do, we'll have to take calls in the evenings or on weekends. And especially if we have a board meeting the next day. And I was just like, all these alarm bells went off for me, Kenya, because I was just like, oh my goodness, that tells me so much about your workplace culture. A, like, why are you preparing for the board meeting the night before? That's not okay. And then B, like, what have you done as a company to try to promote healthy workplaces for families and for people that have dependents? Because saying that you're going to ask people to be around in the evenings and weekends isn't appropriate, and it's not in step with where we are in our workplaces now. And so I think it's trying to think of new solutions. So whether you're in a leadership role and you need to kind of ask yourself, what am I doing differently? Like, Yes, sometimes, you know what? I have to send emails that I'm sending out at 9 and 10 and 11 at night, because that's when I might have time, when my kids are sleeping or whichever, right? But I can schedule them so they show up in people's inboxes the next morning, because I don't want them to have to deal with it in the night. And that's my responsibility to create a good workplace culture, right? But then I think too, as an employee, are you asking for that? Are you encouraging your workplace to be more inclusive and to think about, how do we create spaces that aren't burning people out? Because it shouldn't, it's not just about whether or not you have kids or you don't. It's about creating spaces that are healthy workspaces for everyone. And I think we need to advocate for those kinds of spaces, right? And advocate for people being able to maintain some boundaries around their own mental health and well-being.
Such important conversations and complex ones too. I feel like there's so much ground that we could cover and continue. We have spoken for some time now, and maybe we will have another conversation in the future. But yes, another complex issue. It can be very vulnerable for women too, who are pregnant and are concerned already about being mommy tracked, to advocate for themselves. So that is a whole other can of worms. But that's why I'm so grateful that you are bringing this up, because it does take multiple conversations, bringing people in community together. And I would ask for anybody listening to this episode, if you are, a mother, a woman with a great career, somebody who has had the privilege to have an education, or, provide economically for your family. These are things we can't take for granted, but we do have a responsibility to design the workforces of the future. And I'm not saying you have to revolutionize everything today, but I would encourage you to think about, again, you're circling back to our personal brand, is committing to that inner process of reflection. Like, where can my talents shine a light? In 25 years, what are my kids going to say? And we can close off our conversation about that, right? What are my kids going to say about how I've made the world a better place? Maybe that implies some stillness. We don't have to be hyper productive all this time. And that is scary. It's scary to slow down and stop and not constantly grow and make more money. But I feel kind of called to that in this season of my life. What if my impact in this world in this season is to slow down and give permission to people to do the same, and make them realize it doesn't affect their dignity as a human, or it doesn't in fact impact their worth or their skills? Maybe that is the message I have to bring in this season, that we can just constantly always grow, always produce humans, always grow our GDP, always grow the bottom line. There's more to life than that. But that happened with that deep process of introspection, of succeeding and making a lot of money, and then failing miserably on some aspects of my business, and then having some wins, and accepting that there's an ebb and flow. I think as women, as mothers, we have that important message to bring. So make that commitment to yourself, right? Through your personal brand, through your values, through your vision, to being the light in the world, right? And the change you want to bring. What will your kids say in 25 years about you, Kate? What do you hope? What's your hope?
Do you know what? I really hope that they'll say that I took time for them. Some of my favorite things that I do with my little girl right now is just taking time to read together. I love doing that with her. But I think I also hope that they know that I believe in them, and I champion them in the same way that I would champion others, that I'm their biggest champion, and that I believe that they can do the things they're setting themselves out to do. I think one of the things we talk a lot about in our family is, thinking deeply, but also being kind, being curious, and being courageous. And so it's one of the things I repeat to my little girl each day when I drop her off at her day home, is we talk about how can we be kind, right? And I mean, she's only a year and a half, but there's opportunities for kindness even at that young age. And so I hope that'll be there. And I hope that when she looks at me as her mama, that she knows that I am doing work that I love, and work that is making the world a little bit better, and that she can see that. And that's what I'm going to encourage her to do, is what are the problems she's interested in solving? What are the things that she can do to be of service to make our world a little bit better? And that might be in any industry, probably industries we don't even have right now. But I'm excited, and I hope she'll know that I'll support her. And for my son, the same thing once he comes out here into this world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I can feel the reflection. It does. You don't come up with answers like that on the first shot. I know that you've thought about it. You've thought about your impact. So I thank you for that as a fellow mother, as a fellow woman who's trying to make a positive impact in this world. Kate, we didn't talk in great depth about the Secret Marathon, but I did put it in the ticker so people can find you at thesecretmarathon.com, right?
Absolutely.
And join you in the global movement for equality. So there's secret3k.com. I would invite any of our viewers, if you want to find out more about Kate, to visit that. Who knows, maybe we can have another conversation or event at another time.
Oh, that'd be great. And if people are looking for a little bit, if you need something positive today or this weekend, that little bit of inspiration to help keep your resiliency going, then absolutely, check out the Secret Marathon. It's free to view when you go to secretmarathon.com. And so if that's what you need in your life, if you need a bit of inspiration, go check it out. It's totally going to leave you feeling a little bit stronger.
I will. Actually, I've been watching a lot of foreign documentaries recently just to help me travel again.
Right.
And yes, in my mind. Thank you so much for your time, Kate. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and you found it valuable, please share it with your friends. If you want to encourage moms who want to have meaningful careers and families, this is for you. We always appreciate a review on iTunes or on Google. And so come back to us to engineer your success, leadership, and life harmony like a mother. This was an episode with Kate McKenzie, and we'll see you last week. Please don't run off just yet. I will see you backstage, Kate.